I mentioned in the beginning that I was going to introduce you to another savior of the day who saved just in time. When somebody was not able to make for this meetup, they said, okay, I have a family emergency, so I have a person to call, and that is Avinash, who works as an Agile coach from Cognizant, frequenter to Scrum Bangalore, and hope you enjoy the talk. Give a round of applause for
Okay, great to be back. Nice digs, Prowareness. Warren's looking cool as usual, and I'm back in my boring black shoes. We have two problems. One, the timing is really off.
Take 30 minutes, I think.
Take 30 minutes, yes. But we have a much larger problem. This is the dreaded session before lunch. There's good news and there's bad news. The good news is that Prowareness usually gets some really good lunch, and it comes from Rajdhani and all those nice places. The bad news is in about 15 minutes that aroma will start wafting in, and people will forget about Agile programs and start thinking about what's in the box. Okay, so when I was putting this together yesterday, I realized that I got stuck in a rut. This is the third time I'm giving a presentation in Scrum Bangalore, and all three times I have the same basic flow, right? Something happens, it looks good. Then the first time I said the thing was the empire strikes back. The business comes from the unreasonable demands, and then the heavens fall in. The second time it was picture of Baki and mere dost, because it looked like things were going really well. Then as usual the skies fall in. The theme for today is that, keeping in tune with the times, and Jurassic World is released yesterday. There's a quote from one of the reviews that says, once the dinosaur get out of the enclosure, then it's chomp time. And that's what happened to us on this Agile program. Now we're going to talk a little bit about what success is for an Agile project versus what success is for a program, right? And how they sometimes align, misalign, conflict, etc. We're going to talk about how we've applied Agile, misapplied Agile in all kinds of situations. We apply Agile techniques in projects which have constraints in terms of contracts, in terms of deliverables, in terms of velocity and things like that. I actually presented some of the data, and we're not going to spend too much time on that, given that the Rajdhani is coming in. But I presented some of the data as a success story in the last Scrum gathering, but we look at what happened in the dinosaurs. Right? So the problem statement, and this is from a slide that I actually presented to my team, because we were all sitting and trying to identify how we succeed, how we can possibly succeed in this kind of an environment. So essentially the background is that we're a service provider. We work in a multi-vendor situation where the environment isn't exactly top to bottom Agile. We're trying to do a transformation, but it's far from complete. Now, the cone of uncertainty is a term that we often use for estimates, right? Where we say that there is high uncertainty in the beginning, as you go through time, the uncertainty gets lower. And one way to deal with this evolution and emergence, of course, is to use Agile techniques. Now, the problem was that we had a flat capacity. So we have a team of a certain number of people, and that remains the same across this period of product development. But unfortunately what's happening is that given the uncertainty, we were losing a lot of time waiting for access reviews, approvals and reworks. This was eating up the project buffer. So we had to find a way to deal with, one, the ambiguity, and two, we had to find a way to speed up the amount of work that we were getting executed in a certain unit of time. So we applied Agile, we actually use Scrum Bangalore, but essentially there are three reasons why it really helps us achieve a much greater throughput, a much greater product development velocity. One is that it helps us beat the schoolboy problem. Most of you are familiar with the schoolboy problem? Okay, so I'll walk you through it. My daughter she just started school again. She had 60 days summer holidays, right? And she had very little holiday homework. She's still pretty young. So she had holiday homework worth 5 days. So she obviously decided to start working on her homework on the 55th day of her holidays. And then day 55, no pencil, no eraser, can't find my book, all that happens. And then we start the homework on day 56 and it's a day late. And the teacher very, very reasonably says, you have 60 days to do a task for 5 days, how can you be late? Right? And that's a schoolboy problem. The other thing that happens in software development is that we depend all our estimates, because we're terrible at estimating and it's not our fault, it's the nature of the beast. All our estimates depend on averaging. We know that some of our estimates will take longer than expected, and we know that some of our estimates will take shorter than expected, and on average. So have I been speaking without the mic on this one?
Yes. No, it's quite good.
Okay, I'm going to continue. So our estimates depend upon averaging, right? We say that some tasks will finish sooner, some will take later. But here's the problem. I give a team member a task which has an estimate of 7 days. Now, if the task is late, then that person takes 8 days. But if the task takes 6 days, I don't get that day back, because the completed work product comes to me on the 7th day on schedule. So essentially, if we are depending on averaging to estimate and we do not capture early completes, the probability that our program will be late is pretty close to 100%, because you pay the penalty for all late completes, but you do not capture the early completes. There's just no way that
the developer never discloses secrets confidentially.
Exactly, right? Yes.
If I disclose, you will give me more work.
So essentially, it increases the minimum time. Estimate is the minimum time to complete.
The estimate is the minimum time to completion, exactly. And that's a recipe for being late. And we were in a situation where we had to accelerate from where we were. The favored way to waste time for my team here tends to be, Facebook. Once you go into Facebook, there's nothing wrong with checking Facebook at work, right? But the problem is you have all these links that connect to a baby dancing to a notary, whatever. And this isn't just an India phenomenon. In the UK, the favored thing was dancing dogs, apparently, on Britain's Got Talent. There's a dog that comes and dances on stage and people are clicking on those at work. But anyway, there we are. Finally, the third rule that we wanted to impose in order to increase our throughput is the 1 hour rule. Somebody comes into work, is stuck on an item that they bring out just after the daily stand-up in the morning, right? If it's before the stand-up, fine, it gets caught, typically gets disclosed. But if it's just after that, they tended to waste a majority of the day waiting for help, or they tended not to bring it up, and it would only come up in the stand-up the next day. So what we did was that we put 2 stand-ups in a day. We used Scrum Bangalore, right? And we did a second, we didn't call it a stand-up, but we used a Kanban board and we reviewed that at 4 p.m. We did our stand-up as usual in the morning, but we reviewed this Kanban board in the evening and said, okay, so where are you? There are some other extreme measures that I had to take, which I will not disclose in any such gathering. Going to get me. But anyway, so some qualifiers on what we're going to talk about here. This applies to what I call a real world problem, and that's my bias. There's no such thing as a real world, right? We all have our own real worlds. Is that this isn't an environment which is top to bottom agile. So there are a great deal of compromises that we've done because of a multi-vendor environment, because of contracts, because of what we've committed to delivering to the customer in a contract. There's the program management of this rather large multi-year program has stayed old-fashioned. There's a steering committee, there are reviews, they review risks and issues, and then they look at mitigation plans and things like that. We have fat use cases, but it's okay. The use cases are good quality, no issues there. We have proxy POs and we have several proxy people offshore so that everybody is co-located. We thought we were creating a prioritized clean backlog of what's available. given that the cone of uncertainty was impacting us in the beginning of the program, and we wanted to move really fast to deal with the effects of the cone of uncertainty. Now, I don't know how many of you are wondering, what does this boiled ice cream have to do here, right? But this is one of those shots, disaster movie. They show this, beautiful swimming pool, and there's a kid, he's just sitting there and he's eating ice cream or something, and you know that the dinosaurs are going to get him. This is that shot. Okay, so we did Scrum, and I won't spend too much time on this because I presented this in a previous session right here. Is that what happened in Scrum is that there was an element of loss because we could not capture early complaints, right? What happened was that people estimated that they could do a certain amount of work, and this is our core work, the blue line over here. They finished their work about 2/3 of the way through, and then they wasted the last 1/3 because they were doing a lot of other things, not necessarily looking at bouncing dogs. What happened with Scrum is that we found that people spend a lot more time on core activities right through the project, through the 2-week iteration, right? And this was a VM outage. Anyway, so we saw 16% improvement in productivity, team ownership of process was great. We had a coach with SMs who seemed effective, all the ceremonies in place. We decided to fail fast, so we had small tiger teams with the people we had on site, and we were doing POCs to deal with the conflict in the code. So in most presentations, we create success story, look, we did 16% extra, we create, we good. That's when the divers get out, right? So it is really interesting this morning that I think it was Nagesh who spoke about what kind of a car is it that we are building. And we use that exact same analogy in our project. And we said that we want to build this Porsche 911. Obviously, this car goes faster than this car. So you think, what we forgot was that speed depends on where we're driving. It doesn't matter what kind of a car you're driving. Sometimes it's faster to walk, right? And what I'm trying to bring out with this analogy is that at a project level, a lot of the things we were doing are great. We built this really fast car, everybody thought we were going really fast. But at the program level, this is where we were operating. Let's spend a little time on measurements. What do we measure at a project level? We want to prioritize the backlog so that the team has enough work to do. We want to enable the team to be successful, and we want to look at velocity and responsiveness to see that the team is doing really well. And we were doing all this very well, at least from a measurement perspective. If you look at the program measures, there is a review status, which is typically qualitative, not quantitative. There are risks, issues, and mitigation plans. And there is a budget for a certain schedule, a certain scope. Now this is a multi-year contract, so there's a series of rolling contracts, etc. that are measured at a program level. Soon, what happened was that the program metrics started showing the trend. So what they were saying was that your rework, which is one of the things that you measure, is at 66%. Now, that started putting pressure on the teams to just effing do it, right? Now, what's done is not really done. Why not would you want to make those changes? Just because business wants it? Come on, you contract with IT, right? So you have to hit the measurements that are on the program dashboard for IT. Not necessarily what the business wants. How is that relevant to this contract discussion that's going on? And there's a great deal of tracking that focused on cost and schedule impact that came from the program measurements that were being driven across the program. And that was the big disconnect because the program measurements weren't agile. The project measurements were, and they were fine, but the program measurements weren't, and that started putting a lot of pressure on the team. Now, conversely, our agile approach, where we said that it's okay, we know that there's evolution and emergence, we're going to chunk some of the items in the cone of uncertainty, do some POCs, get some stuff done, actually led to a situation where it was worse for us, because the measurements at the program level stayed green for longer than they would have in a traditional project where we would have said, you know what, you haven't finalized everything, you're not going to do everything, everything's ready. Right? So in a strange way, it was actually more sensible for us to have taken an approach where we would have said, give us everything or we're not going to do it, given the measurements of the program. So the steering committee dashboard, what we decided in the beginning was that we have this collaborative approach where we raise risks and issues, but we very quickly saw that a traditional program management approach relies very, very heavily on keeping things green. People are rewarded, incentivized for keeping things green, which is of course very anti-agile, which is disclosed sooner, but that really works against being able to pull out any sort of meaningful change early in the process. Because only when something is deep red and you actually hit the wall, then people wake up and say, okay, so we're no longer talking about mitigation actions in the future, we're talking about something that's dead now. And that's when the steering committee gets up and says, okay, let's set up a task force to investigate this. And that's 3 weeks down the line. We're still talking about that. Okay, we're having lots of meetings where we're talking about, okay, this item's dead, so what are we doing about it? But there's very little progress and the cone of uncertainty just keeps extending further and further to the right, through our timeline. Right, so what are the 3 agile program level items that we must do and we had to put in place as a result of what we learned from us? Is that one, and you'll see that some of the DADs and the SAFEs, they have this built into their framework, and I think there's, I'm coming around to the view that there's value in that, especially when we're doing large programs. Is this idea of an architectural runway. Now the architectural runway, in SAFE it would be 3 months, but in DAD it's a different item. But we didn't have an architectural runway, and that really cost us. What we did have, and we thought we were being really smart, is that we had people doing proof of concepts to prove a certain item before you push it into development. But what's done in a proof of concept is very far from done for a development team. So if we spend 4 weeks, 6 weeks doing something at a POC level, it took another 4 weeks before we could actually complete it. Even though in a non-agile perspective we proved the technology, it took an additional 4 weeks in addition to the original 6 to actually get that item complete and production ready. So a second item was that to test a slice of functionality to actually be able to deliver it to production, it has to be end-to-end, which is of course obvious. The problem comes in when the UI is being done by a different vendor. The database changes are done by a different vendor. They have their own contracts, their own SLAs. And you have this large slice in between. Then how do you align everything in one place? And that is something that is beyond the ability of a person sitting in a car to solve. He or she cannot solve the traffic problem or a congestion problem, being one of the participants sitting in and driving one of these cars, and that's what happened to us. Finally, evolution and emergence will cause the project to run out of money and time in a traditional sense, because the traditional program management view is that you have a project, everybody understands, everybody expects that there will be CRs, and they see benefit realization way later than project completion. But if you start applying an agile perspective, you know that you're going to get benefit realization here, but you know what, phase 1 is really big. Because you've spent almost twice the amount of money that you were sanctioned in order to get phase 1 done. And that's really one of the big challenges that we have to tackle, is the communication that says, if you're using any of the agile techniques in order to deliver benefit realization sooner, it makes your traditional program management metrics look really bad. And if you don't deal with that, soon the amount of noise that happen on the traditional measurement systems will cause a serious impact to the project here. So I will leave some time for Q&A, and we have 10 minutes, 7 minutes.
We're already out of time, so as many minutes as we want before we want to go to lunch.
Yes. Yes. The aromas haven't reached there because of the noises.
Check it out.
Hey, let's have some questions, right? Lunch is there, still getting ready.
So when we talk about project management, how does the enabling team get
What do you mean by the enabling?
Yeah, one of the points that you mentioned is
Yes.
velocity and product factor, I think definitely makes sense for the
Yes.
message level for the project.
Right.
But enabling of team, how does that take part?
Okay, good question. Enabling generally was primarily a move away from a position-based command and control approach to a joint team ownership. So there was, there's work to be done to transition away from here's the manager, here's the team lead to we are a team. That's what I was talking about.
You back some numbers?
What we did was that we looked at the percentage of people who were not the senior most in that team but were assigned key tasks. Traditionally what would happen is the others would wait until that person finished. Now that doesn't happen anymore.
How about the situations where contracts have settings velocity on a per day basis or weekly basis?
Yes. Velocity on a per day basis, that is a particular brand of hell that I haven't experienced. But I've always worked on contractually committed velocity on an iteration basis. We've always had that pressure. And what very quickly happens is, it's easy to game the numbers. So we can say that we've done this much amount of work, but it isn't necessarily fresh work. Because we've done something. But one way we can look at it is how much fresh function points, if we use function points as a basis, how many fresh function points did you deliver in the iteration as opposed to the total number of function points to include rework. Because as a business person, what they are really interested in is how much did the product progress towards benefit realization. That's what they're really interested in. The rest, they don't care, right? They don't care how much we did, how much work we did on the architecture side or on rework. But from a contract perspective, I go to the customer and say, pay me because we did valid work, which is valid for the purpose of the project. So I think I've never been in a position where we didn't have targets for velocity, and I think that is just par for the course. We're stuck with that. Yeah, I'm sorry, but yeah.
One is business process IT and the second is marketing IT.
Yes.
Where even in one user story you have multiple applications.
Absolutely.
Any thoughts on how
Yes. I'll take the second one first because it's easier to address. Okay, the second part of the question was, we have a scenario where we have multiple vendors who take a different slice of the functionality that must be delivered. In our case, a different database vendor, a different UI vendor, and a different automation, essentially us. No, we're doing it, thankfully. And we had a big chunk in between. Alignment isn't possible by any of the participants sitting in the car. It has to be done at a program level, which is where any technique, SAFe for example, not necessarily advocating SAFe, but it's just that that gives a 3-month envelope where you say all 3 items line up for delivery over the next 3 months. Yes. So I think DAD has a different schedule, things like that. So at a program level, we can have alignment between all 3. Unless we bring together all 3 teams and give them the sense that they are one team, there will always be contractual disputes between the players. So it's really important to bring all three together. It's much harder for us to disagree or not deliver something to people we've never met. Because then you can put up the contract and say, hey, this is what I'm supposed to do. But we have found that once you get people together, especially if they are meeting each other every day, the collaboration is a lot better. And that's one way to overcome it. We did a little bit of that on site at the customer location where we had representatives all sitting together. So that really helps. Now the first part of the question was the business versus IT. IT still thinks of itself as a cost or a spending center, right? As a cost center. They say business has given us so much money, here's our justification to prove what we did with your money. They're not yet having the conversation where they're saying, here's the value we've given you. So it's still a very much cost conversation than a value conversation. It's the same thing that Agile is trying to move us away from, but that yet hasn't taken hold in middle management IT. That's where we still see a lot of very cost thinking, and that leads us to situations. Any other questions?
Probably behind the same process. We're talking about different component teams, right? We have component teams. So probably can form a feature team as well, which is responsible for delivering end-to-end when we have such kind of scenario.
That is correct. But then there must be a deliberate effort in order to create that feature team. It will not happen automatically if you have different components assigned to different vendors, each of whom are working on their own contracts. So it's a deliberate effort, yes.
And probably a program level?
At the program level, yes, it is a program level task. It's not a project.
Here you say rewarding is against Agile.
Rewarding is against Agile. Really, which slide is that to me?
Somewhere. That's an interesting discussion for open hours. Just proceed with that question. Yeah, rewarding and injustice. I'll take that.
Alright, should we hit those boxes then? Yes.
Hey, anybody still has questions, please put them in stickies and stick them to the pillars. Okay, lunch is, oh, thank you very much. Avinash.